a research community that is based on NLP for low resource or under resource languages. So before I go into IrokoBench itself, I want to give a bit of background of why this research was conducted, basically. So basically, we all know of LLMs and how widely they're being adopted by everyone, both globally and how they impact our lives. Various aspects of our lives. So it does now become essential that these models are able to perform not just on English or high-resource languages, but also on languages that are under-resourced, as the adoption has been global and it impacts several people at several times. Yeah, but we've also noticed a great improvement in the elements from basic tasks like the classification tasks or generative tasks where you just needed to generate the next token, to more complex and knowledge-intensive tasks like mathematical reasoning, coding, and question answering. And we have to evaluate, or we have to understand how this improvement has gone in both different scenarios and different languages. But one thing we've noticed is that most of the language coverage in the evaluation data sets that has been done for this complex tasks are mostly in English or in other high-resource languages. And they do not currently reflect their capabilities. And so most of the multilingual evaluations, like Extreme Of, for example, and some other examples do not cover like intensive tasks for African languages. So this is what we're trying to address, not just an evaluation data set, but an evaluation data set on complex tasks. So for this, we picked three tasks: the natural language inference, the mathematical reasoning, and multi-choice knowledge-based QA. And we did this for 16 languages. Yeah, I'm not sure how questions are gonna go, but if you have a questions again, you could raise your hand in between and I'll address it during the talk. Yeah, so that's what I was saying. All right, so yeah, so we picked three major tasks on 16 diverse African languages. And the data sets are mostly human translated data sets from the main data set. So these tasks, the NLI, the mathematical reasoning, and the multi-choice QA, are already existing data sets in English and some high-resource languages, but we translated from English into the languages for 16 languages, and each of the language had a professional translator doing the translation. Yeah, so again, like I said, the tasks were selected mostly due to their complexity and their coverage in various domains and downstream tasks, and their ability to evaluate the logical, abstract, and reasoning capabilities of large language models. Yeah, so what are these tasks? So MGSM is a mathematical reasoning question where the model is asked a question and is expected to return an answer, or a mathematical question and is expected to do the logical calculations and return the response. Now I present this in English just so that we can understand it, because most of us speak different languages, so I don't want to put the African languages that's not understandable. But yeah, so you ask a question, the model expected to return a response. While in the MMLU, similar to MGSM, but in this case, it has multiple choice, and it's not just mathematical reasoning. It covers various other domains like the global facts, agriculture, several other domains. And XNI deals with hypothesis and premise. So you have a premise, you have three hypotheses, and the model is meant to, or is expected to reply on if this hypothesis contradicts, entails, or is neutral to the premise that's being provided. So what we did is we only took a sample of the major data sets. So this, the actual GSMK, MMLU and XNI data set covers a lot more than we took. We took about 250 samples from the GSMK data set. We took 500 samples from the MMLU and 600 from the XNI in terms of the test sets. In terms of dev and train, we took 8 from NGSM, which is the only 8 train sets that is available in the GSMK. We also took 25 from the MMLU and 83 and 450 from XNI. Again, this the number that we took is just relative to how much time we had, and how many translators we were able to afford, basically. Yeah, so like I just explained, the data set were created by humans translating from English version into the 16 languages, except for certain languages like the Ewe, the Lingala, and the Wolof, which were translated from French, because the speakers of these languages are in the Francophone regions of Africa, and they are usually more fluent in French than in English. So we translated the data set from French to the languages rather than from English. And each translators were compensated appropriately. For quality control, okay, sorry, before I go into this, does anyone have any question or anything you want me to clarify? No? Okay. I guess we can keep going. Okay. So one of the issues with human translating data sets is that it is prone to mistakes, sometimes mistranslation, sometimes spelling errors. But to ensure that the data set that we're presenting is of good quality, we implemented some quality control measures. One of the quality measures is using comment quality estimation scores to evaluate the sentences that have been translated. For the comments is trained on several iResource languages also, but so we use the AfriComments, which is a comment evaluation metrics that is already adapted for African languages. Yeah, so some of the results we got is for 13 languages, we had a score between 0.7 to 1. For comment scores, the closer you are to 1, the better the resource is, or the good the result is, basically. So a score from 0.7 to 1 is considered a very good score. But however, we had about 3 languages that had an average score of 0.5. And we found out that, or after more analysis, we found out that this is mostly because these languages were not included in the model, in the pre-trained encoder that was used to train or used to adapt the AfriCommets metric. But yeah, so we also implemented some manual quality control measures, like ensuring that each of the sentences or each of the translated sentences were reviewed by language coordinators. Now, language coordinators are different from the professional translators, so that ensures like there is no bias in terms of reviewing. And we also ensure that the translators were only paid after the language control or the language coordinator has verified or reviewed each of the sentences and verified it as being okay or being of good quality. Yeah. So for some of the models that we evaluated, yeah, that's all on data set creation if you have any question. But moving over to the models we evaluated. So we evaluated it on 2 subgroup of models, the open models and the closed models. In the open models, we try to diversify between encoder-decoder models and decoder-only models. So encoder-decoder models like the FLAMC5, the MC0, AYA, which are encoder-decoder models, and AYA, I think, is adapted from the MT5 also. Then the decoder-only models like Llama, Gemma, Blooms, and Commander. For closed models, we picked the 2 models, GPT and Claude, and that's because they've been widely known to be the best performing closed models for majority of the tasks that we're looking at. Yeah, for the evaluation settings, we conducted evaluation in 2 different settings, in language and in translate test. In language simply means that we give the model the sentence in the translated language. So if I'm evaluating a Yoruba sentence, for example, or a Yoruba question in MGSM, I'm giving the model the question in Yoruba. But in translate test, we translated the question from Yoruba to English using the NNLB 200, which has been known to have very good performance, very good translation performance on African languages. Yeah, and I think another thing to notice is we prompt the model in a cross-lingual setting. That's because it's been widely known that the models perform well on English prompts than in language prompts. So instead of monolingual, where we give the instruction, where we would have given the instruction in Yoruba and the sentence in Yoruba, we give the instruction in English and we give the sentence or the question in Yoruba, and we expect English response. That is to just have a good performance in the models rather than having a performance that we would not get any good analytics from, as has been seen or has been experimented on many monolingual settings. Yeah, so for the evaluation tool, we use the Unita AI LMNS tool, which I think it was created by OrganFace and has been popularly used these days to provide standard evaluation or to standardize evaluation across various tasks. So basically, if you go to the NS, you see this evaluation and you can run it and test it in various ways. Yeah, so for the experiment, we did cross-lingual transfer experiment and zero-shot and few-shot experiment. For the cross-lingual transfer experiment, we focus on XNI, which is because there's training data available for supervised learning. So in this experiment, we did a more supervised learning on max language models like the XLML, Serengeti, AFO-LML, and yeah, the various sizes of AFO-LML. And yeah, and for the zero and few-shot setting, that is where we did the prompting. So in zero-shot prompting, you prompt, and like I explained in cross-lingual, where we prompt, we give the instruction in English, give the question in the language, and expect responses in English. Same thing with the few-shots, we give the instruction in English, give the few-shot samples, and the question that the model is to respond. Yeah, so for the few shots, we did 5-shot assessments for AFO-MMLU and AFO-XNI, and 8-shot assessments for MGSM. Now remember that MGSM had only 8 training data, so if you go rather than using only 5 from each, we use the entire 8 since that's all that exists in the first place. Yeah, so any question on the evaluation setup and how we conducted the evaluations of this long language model? I don't know if that's okay, does that make sense? All right, so I guess to keep going. So now to some of the results of these evaluations. Now, yeah, so the first result here is the average scores across all languages and language setting. And by that, we mean the language and the translate test, which are the average language and translate test scores across the African languages. And we also compare that with just only English and only French score. Now, the essence of this comparison is to see how this model perform in African languages, which have been translated, versus the original English data or the original French data. And from this graph, you can see the performance on African languages is really low compared to the English and the French results, for example, and that is across all the model, including the max model that was trained on English and evaluated on the African languages. Yeah, but from this graph, you can also see that using the max models perform way better than using most of the large language models that were evaluated for African languages and across all, yeah, for all the African languages and even in the French settings. And we can see from this graph that among the large language models, the GPT models perform better than most of the other models. And you see that actually the closed models perform most better than the open models, except Llama of 70 billion parameters. Now, for the closed models, we obviously don't know how much parameters that they were trained on, but we see that with more data, we get better performances in the open source models as seen in the Llama 3 70B models. We also try to display the average scores for each of the tasks. And as I explained earlier, the closed models perform better than the open models, apart from the Llama 70B across all tasks. And so far, I think XNI are the best performance across all the models compared to MGSM, which indicates that the models are not able to reason logically when it comes to African languages, for example. Because you can see that in the Llama 70B, the translate test scores was really high compared to the language scores. I remember translate test is we translated the actual African questions back to English using automatic translation, and it still performs better than when you give it the score and the question in the African language. Yeah, so we can discuss the insights in a more structured manner. So for the model insights, like I said, there's a large performance gap between high-resource languages and African languages. And there's also a large performance gap between closed models and open models. And majority models perform worse in language prompting than translate text prompting, which is just to say that the models still perform better in English, even if the translations may not necessarily be of great quality because it's an automatic translation rather than human translation than it does when you give the model the question or you evaluate it in the African language. Now, for stack-specific insights, we see that the AfriMMRU has better performance prompting in the language, and the MGSM receives significant boost when you're prompting in translate text, meaning it performs better in the translate text settings than in the in-language setting. And yeah, for most linguists, we see the cross-lingual transfer, which is the AfroXML. Again, we only display the AfroXML because it was the best performing models on the max models, on the various max models we evaluated. So the XML, Serengeti, and XML base and large, didn't perform as well as the XML, AfroXML large, 76 large, actually. Okay, yeah. So impact of few shots versus zero shots. We see that with few shots, the model tends to have a slight improvement across all the tasks compared to zero shot prompting. So this is to say that when given like more examples or certain examples of what the questions are meant to be addressed or answered, you see that the model perform a bit better than without any example at all. Yeah. So another analysis that we did was how sensitive were the models to the various prompt instructions that were given. So in this setting, we evaluated two different prompts. One is a more detailed prompt and one is a simple prompt. And we did it for only the XL and I because we had two standard prompts already that have been tested, which is the ANLI prompt and the live prompt. The major difference between the prompts is that ANLI tries to put it in a true, false, neither situation. So a simple sentence. We give it the premise, we give it the hypothesis, and we ask the model, is this true, false, or neither? Well, in the live prompts, we try to explain okay, you need to see the hypothesis and the premise and see if it entails or contradicts or is neutral to the premise in a more detailed instruction. Yeah, and we're able to see that the open models like Aya and Gemma prefer the simple prompts where you just ask it true, false, or neither, and then it gives a response. Then when you give a detailed instruction on how the task should be addressed. While the closed models prefer detailed prompts than simple prompts. Yeah, which is just something to note when you're prompting the model. Yeah, so I think we're reaching to the conclusion of this project. I think so far, do you guys have any questions on the results or the analysis results? Okay, someone asked, how do you explain AFRIM GSM 8 shots performing differently from zero shots? So yeah, so like the performance is different mostly because you're giving the model more examples than in zero shots where you're giving no example. So in zero shots, we simply say, this is the question, provide a response. While in 8 shots, we gave it 8 examples. Now it's 8 question and answer pairs. And we then ask it the final question without any answer. We expect it to follow the logic from the samples to respond to the question that doesn't have any sample. There's cultural differences in how the stacks are approached and understood across the different languages. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, in terms of cultural differences, that would be relevant if we were evaluating in different cultural contexts. In this case, we are simply evaluating the model logical reasoning capability. So that's to say, we simply give it the same question in different languages. So we didn't change like the names, which would then indicate different cultural contexts. For example, a Nigerian name or Yoruba name is very different from an Hausa name or an Ewe name. Now that would have put some cultural context to the question, but in this case, we're evaluating the same question just in different languages. So we're not able to see if there are like challenges relating to cultural differences. How were the prompts designs balanced? Okay, so we used a combination of prompts, right? We used some prompts that has been standardly used in some evaluation, like the ANI prompt I mentioned, the live prompt, and we also see some other prompts like the Megaverse benchmark and some other benchmark that has been widely accepted. So we kind of reused some of the prompts for just we changed the input to be the African language question. And for other prompts that have not been standardized or we couldn't find a prompts that has been used already, we created prompts. We sampled it on some of the sentences to kind of see how the prompts perform, and then we use the prompts that is performing better. The theory languages, do they have variations in style and differences? Yeah, I think I was gonna get into that. So the theory language different families are usually have like two different language scripts. So a neo language family, for example, could have a Latin script, while another language could have a different script. So I think that's how we group the languages. How much was the impact? I don't think I have an answer to the question of the impact of the different language family, because we kind of evaluated or kind of see the performance on the various individual languages, then grouping them to families. But yeah, you could check the paper and see the results and kind of see how the different family performs. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's all the question. Let's go back to the slide. So yeah, limitation of study is that the benchmark is human translated, which, like I said before, is prone to errors. But we apply quality control measures to ensure that the translations are of good quality and usable for any evaluation tasks. Yeah, we cover all the theory language families in Africa, and obviously there is lots more languages and language family in Africa. We did this briefly due to availability of professional translators and language coordinators, and also time frame we had for the project. Prompts used for the evaluations are also not exhaustive. So again, like I said, we use some standard prompts that has been widely accepted in the communities. But again, these prompts are not exclusive or standard in terms of if you change the prompts, the responses can be different at any point in time. Okay, yeah, so I guess that brings us to the conclusion. And we're able to see the models are able to perform more complex tasks than simple text classification tasks. But then we're able to see that there's a lot of performance gap between performing these tasks in English versus performing these tasks in African languages. Yeah. That's the end of the presentation. Any more questions concerning that?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jessica. Super neat presentation. So I'm gonna start with my questions, and then if people have questions, you can follow up by just unmuting yourself or typing them in the chat. So the first thing that I want to know is in the in-language setup you have, I mean models like GPT-4 and the Aya were the ones that were performing better.
Yeah.
Can you say, was it because, can you suggest that the model size is less impactful for in-language performance? Because Aya didn't do well in the other things, but now it did well here. Or does this result to the limitations in larger English-centric models like Llama?
Yeah, so I'd say one of the reasons that Aya did really well because it had been trained on some of these languages. So I guess what would impact this is how adapted these models are to the African languages in question. In terms of size, I'll say size not necessarily matters if it has not been adapted to those languages. So in terms of you could transfer knowledge from the resource languages into the African languages, but that's not always the case. Like we're seeing this Llama 70B as one of the highest parameters, where it performs really well on the language and the French task and even the translate test. But when it comes to African language, it doesn't perform as well, or even half as well, and most of the tasks.
Oh, okay.
But then you can see this XML large that has been previously trained or pre-trained on some of this African language, even though it's just a max model, not a large language model. And you can see that its performance has relatively good performance in both in language and translate tests compared to the English and French.
I see. Also, even for the cross-lingual transfer, I think the relying was on English data, right? From English to other languages.
Yes.
Yeah. So doesn't that limit? I mean, like when testing them, doesn't that like introduce some sort of English centric stuff into the other languages? For example, like my language Amharic is not written in Latin alphabets, and the grammar is a little bit different than English. Wouldn't that affect if you are just doing the cross-lingual with English only?
Sorry, I don't understand that. When you say cross-lingual with English only, is it a cross-lingual max model where it was trained on English and evaluated on the African language?
Yeah.
Or do you Okay, yeah. So again, the whole essence is to just test in the natural setting of the model, how does it perform on African languages? So without any further training on these languages or this data, how does the model perform based on like the current training of the model? And we did that specifically because we cannot train the closed model, and we are comparing the performance of the open models to the closed models. So in order for a fair comparison, we don't train the other models on the data sets that we're trying to evaluate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe one last question I have is, there is a variation of context window or like the context length for each of the models, Aya being the least one. Were there any scenario where the model was truncating a few prompts when you do like few shots, or like were all falling to the context category?
Yeah, so most of them fell into the context category for most of the model, because again, the prompts were simple. The few shots were not a lot. We did 5 shots for XNR and 8 shots for MGSM, which simply included the question and the answer, the question and the answer 8 times. So most of the prompts fell within the context window of the models.
Yeah, the reason I was asking was in few shots, the Aya model didn't perform well compared to the other in some scenarios. So I thought maybe it was truncating because it only had like 8K context length, or was it another problem?
Yeah, we actually when I say we're particular about checking the context window, so most of them fell within the context window of all the models.
Oh, thank you. Now I would leave the floor for the others to ask. So you can feel free to unmute yourself if you got any questions.
Yeah.
So there was one question in the chat. It says English has lots of variations. Has there been any study on the variations of the languages? So does African language too?
Sorry, I'm trying to understand the question. English has lots of variations.
Yeah, I'm just gonna copy and paste the question in. You can
I'm trying to read it. So Syrian study on the variations of those languages. Well, no, we didn't study the variations in the different particular languages, because even in if you check the paper and the results, you see that sometimes Swahili performs a lot better than Amharic, and sometimes Amharic performs better than Zulu. And so far, we are chunking that to the availability of data, but then we don't know specifically why the languages or the different languages perform better or worse, especially in the closed models where we don't know what they're trained as. And for the open model, we can kind of hypothesize that, okay, it's been trained on more Swahili data, that's why it performs better. Or it's been trained on more Amharic data, that's why it performs better than Zulu models. But yeah, there's a lot of variations within even the African languages. And yeah, so I guess that's a future research direction that could be looked into.
Awesome. Maybe this could be a very generic question, but in the few shots, there was variations of different results. Maybe if you can go to the few shot results. I mean, have you tried to see why the few shots have different variations? Uh, for example, like the Aya had a limited boost compared to the Llama 3, which is the 70 billion parameter. Is it like because of the model architecture of itself, or like is it because of the few shot setup itself?
Oh, I see. So I'd say in terms of in few shares, basically because the model has more samples to kind of understand the logic and patterns from, it is expected to perform better, which is why I say that in most of the tasks, it does perform better than zero shots. But in, for example, you can say in this Llama 70B, it's kind of doesn't perform better than the zero shots. And then in IA and MGSM, it has very similar performance. Then when you give him more sample and when you don't give him more sample. I'll say, for example, in the NGSM where the task is actually complex and it doesn't have options, it has to still, well, regardless of whether it sees more samples or more examples of the question and the answer, it still has to logically answer the question that's being presented. So basically, the patterns in the facial sample does not educate or does not give more context to the question being asked compared to like MMLU and XNI, where it's able to see, okay, these are the patterns. It's really like XNI where if you have more samples, you're able to say that, oh, this, when you give this sort of hypothesis and when you give this sort of premise, then it's a contradiction versus when you give another sample where it's an entailment and you're able to study the various patterns in the various samples, and like MMLU also, but in MGSM where it's only a question and an answer, you still have to calculate the question that is being asked regardless of the samples you've sent.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I mean, I was just curious, even for each of the datasets here, sometimes the model, I am assuming you are using the same 5 shots for each of the models, for each of the tasks. So, I mean, why doesn't Aya have, let's say, almost 10, almost by, I mean, the Llama 3 increased by 10, and then the Aya was like by 1. So I was like, why does that happen?
Yeah, I think that's more specific to the models and their architecture and method of training than it is about the data, really, because it's the same 5 shots across all the models for each of the tasks, or the same samples.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions from the chat or?
So hi. I wanted to ask, like, when it comes to evaluating LLMs on African languages, do you really think the only problem with these LLMs are the lack of African data? Or do you think that the architecture is also very much adapted to the English language? Because when we go to the historical algorithms used for an NLP, they were very much like focused on English grammar, English structure, how to extract context. So that's very language specific. So do you really think that even now, the LLMs, the architectures behind these are adapted very much to English? And how does that play? Or just like, is it the more data results in better LLMs?
Okay, no, so I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, it's been tested and known that more data results in better results. But in cases where you don't have more data, you have to then build the architecture in such a way that it adapts to both English and other languages that does not have as much data. And there's been recent research around that, actually, in terms of people building like mini models that is adapted to both English and the African languages. And you see that they're able to perform a lot better across the languages than the big models that has been really built, or the architecture has been built solely on English, and then they're now trying to add more data to train it. So the problem is both of them, really, both more data and better architectures that are able to adapt even with limited data. So it's like, and again, there's been several samples that even with less data, you can do more than just building a big model that works only well on English.
Okay, so another question.
Yeah.
Does fine-tuning maybe on like African languages or more generally lower resource languages affect the performance on English or high resource languages?
No, I don't think it does, because when the model has already been trained on English, meaning it has learned what it needs to learn from the English data. And most times when you fine tune it on African languages, most times transfers the knowledge learned from English to the African languages, as well as the knowledge that is learning in the African languages. So yeah, I don't see why it will perform less on English than it already has. Maybe yeah. I don't see why, but you should probably check that out.
Great, thanks.
Okay. I have one more question, and I'll give people to think about the questions they have. So I'll jump in and ask one more question. Can you tell us a bit about the translate taste evaluation setup? Like, why did you use NLLB? Why not maybe Google Translate? Or like, what does it show that the translate test evaluation setup?
Okay, so the NLLB, we use NLLB because it's been trained on most of the languages that we're evaluating on. And it's also one of the widely known multilingual translators that perform really well on African languages. So that's why we used it. The whole essence is just to show that even with the same question translated into English, the model performance varies, right? So even when you test it in like the same Yoruba sentence that has been automatically translated, so you can always like verify the translations and whatnot, that the model has different performance. Yeah, so I think that's why, and that was how the translators were created. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Okay, I'll take that. But do you need me to provide any more clarity on it?
I mean, I'm assuming the translators will also introduce its own bias because of the translation stuff that you used. So I'm assuming if we got any more results, was it because of, I mean, how representative is the result in regarding to the bias that introduced just from the machine translation?
Okay, yeah, so what we did to mitigate against the bias is to just ensure that the translator that we're using is actually performing well on these languages. So again, we already have the English version of the text, so you're able to perform an automatic evaluation on the translation results versus the English text and see just how well the translators perform. So far, NNLB still performs best, which is why we used it. So that kind of just limits the bias that's been introduced, but that's not saying that there's zero bias, but that's just saying that it limits the bias that's being introduced.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Do we have any more questions? I don't see any more questions. Yeah. Yeah, I think we don't have any more questions. So this recording will be shared in a few days in the Cohere YouTube channel. Are you okay with that, Jessica?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks a lot, Jessica. It was super awesome to have you. Yeah, hopefully this won't be your last presentation at Cohere.
Hopefully. And thank you for having me. I hope it was a productive conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, for attending this session. Thanks a lot, Jessica. I hope you've seen the love in the chat. So thanks a lot.
Oh,
so
thank
bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everyone. Oh, wait, someone raised their hand.
Do we have any more questions? I can, yeah.
Well,
Sure, I'll entertain that. No worries.
Okay. Yeah, I think the person gave up.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.